Well, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Karen Goodenough, and I'm Executive Director of the NASW Minnesota chapter. I'm also co-chair of the NASW Licensure Task Force with my colleague Sarah Butts, our National Director of Public Policy, who is also with us this evening or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country today. Thank you so much for joining us for NASW's second Facebook Live for National Stakeholder Review of the Interstate Compact for Social Work Licensure, which, as hopefully everyone knows now, is under development, and draft legislation is currently out for public comment. Our team will put into the links, we'll put into the chat links to CSG's Social Work Compact website so that you can check out the draft if you haven't already seen it. And just to note that our first Facebook Live session was on July 26th, and that session was recorded. The NASW will put already to catch yourself up. Tonight's session is not meant to be a redo of that previous session, but completely different content in the sense that we really want to hear from you in tonight's session. Now, along that line, we will focus mostly this evening on question and answer with the audience. So we want to know what additional questions you have. We want to see where our audience wants to go in discussion of the compact. Many of you have been attending CSG's informational sessions over the past month and a half. Some of your state chapters, including mine, have been hosting all sorts of conversations and meetings and things to look at the compact and think about our public comment on it. And so at this point, we really want to hone in on where do people want to spend their time. With us tonight, we have several reps from NASW and the Council of State Governments, CSG. And just a note that the Interstate Compact for Social Workers is being developed with funding from the Department of Defense. ASWB is a lead partner with CSG, and NASW and the Clinical Social Work Association were also partners in this work. So first off, as we start out this evening, we're going to hear from Angelo McClain, CEO of NASW, and Joyner, President of NASW, and then we'll turn it over to our colleagues from CSG, and then we'll take questions and thoughts from the audience. So as we go through each of our speakers, if you have questions, comments, thoughts as we go along, please drop those into the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can once we get to the Q&A period. So with that, I want to turn it over to Angelo and Mitt.
Thank you, Dr. KG. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Angelo McClain, NASW's Chief Executive Officer. NASW has long been committed to licensure that works for our profession. This includes license portability. So we're really excited to be participating in this work on the compact. We've had a licensure task force at NASW that's been meeting for 4 years now. And for the last 2 years, we've been focused on supporting the development of the compact. We have representatives from our chapters and our national office who are helping with the Interstate Compact development process. We are looking out for social workers' interest. Let me say that again. We are looking out for social workers' interest in this process. We know that the angel is in the details, and we know that you want us to ensure that we get the details correct. We are working to ensure that there is broad, informed stakeholder input, and we appreciate all social workers and social work organizations that are providing comments and responding to the draft legislation. And as you all know, that we value diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we also want to lift up the NASW Code of Ethics as we do this work. And we can look to the Code of Ethics to guide us, particularly when we get into some of those issues on the compact that there may be varying opinions on which directions we should go on. So let me say again, we're asking social workers from across all settings to weigh in and comment on the draft compact legislation. Your voice is important, and we're going to make sure that your voice is included and you know your voice is included. I want to emphasize that the voice of organizations at this stage of the compact development is vital. Individual comments are critically important, but we do want to make sure that social work organizations weigh in at this point in time as well. So we very much encourage you to submit comments and attend any review sessions. And I want to thank you for attending this review sessions. And I would encourage you to, through word of mouth or through your networks, through your social media and your contacts, to encourage your colleagues and the organizations you're connected with to comment on this compact legislation. We want to get it right. We want it to be a compact that we can all stand behind. And with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Mitt Joyner, so she can give you some of her thoughts and reflections. And as you guys know, Dr. Joyner is president of NASW. To you, Mitt.
Mitch, you're muted. We've got to get you. There you go. Get yourself unmuted there.
I owe myself some money because when I don't mute, I make people go on unmute. I make them pay. So I owe you all some money. All right. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. This is a very important matter that we are discussing. As Angelo mentioned, I am Mitt Joyner, president of NASW. This is an exciting time for the profession as we develop an interstate compact for social workers that will allow for interstate practice. I live in Pennsylvania. I touch Delaware and New Jersey. This compact is so critical. We want to acknowledge that during the development of the compact, the Association of Social Work Boards has released a very troubling pass rate data, which shows disparity in pass rates, especially for Black test takers. NASW issued a statement on the data release on August the 11th, 2022. And yes, yesterday, ASW also released a statement. I want to assure our members and all social workers that we at NASW are taking this matter with the licensing exam very seriously. It is a priority now for us to really look and digest all of this information. See, we are committed to ensuring a licensing process that is fair, free of bias and discrimination, and allows all for full participation in the profession. We are, and we do recognize that the value and the strength in our profession is our diversity and the importance of recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce. We also know that a lot of words are being bannered around. And so we ask you all to listen, to go and find the knowledge, to not throw mud at social workers, but for us to all take this serious so that we can develop something that bends that arc of justice for equity for all. And with that, I want you to know that I promise to do whatever I can, as well as NASW, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. KG. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mitt. I think we're going to come back to that in a moment. So audience members who are, the ASWB data is really, it feels very dire. It's very timely. It's very important to all of us right now in front of us, and this question of the exams. And we absolutely will talk about that tonight if that's something our audience wants to talk about. But we also know that a compact is under development. And as both Angelo and Mitt have stated, our profession has wanted a compact, and professionals across the country want the ability to practice across state lines. I want to say before we turn it to CSG, who's going to give us some backdrop on what this whole compact development process is like. I'm just going to give the really simple version for folks if you're fairly new to this conversation. First, the compact legislation has to be drafted and finalized. And that's the process that we're going through right now. Once that piece of legislation is finalized, then it has to pass in at least 7 states in our legislatures in order for the commission to get going and for compact licensure to even start to be available to social workers in our states. So this whole development process is a process. And so we have to be patient in that the unfolding and the figuring out of all the pieces of it. But right now, what's important is that it is a compact that we all believe is good for our profession and that we can also get passed in our state legislatures. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to our colleagues from CSG, who is going to share some brief comments about how interstate compacts work and the development thus far on the social work compact. So Keith, Dan, and Nahali, I'm going to turn it over to you. Go ahead, Keith.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen. Thank you to Dr. McClain and everybody at NASW. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We share your excitement about the future of the social work profession and a compact for the social work profession. Along with a team of stakeholders, we've been engaged in developing the social work licensure compact for a year and 4 months now. And so we've been holding weekly stakeholder review sessions, and we're excited to share more about that with you today and answer as many questions as we can. So I don't know if we have slides, but if they could be put up, we're going to do a little bit of background on the compact for anybody who was not able to attend last time, or just to provide a little bit of context. So if we go to the next slide. Just want to briefly share a little bit about who we are with the Council of State Governments. So primarily, CSG is a national membership organization for elected and appointed state officials. We're the only organization serving all 3 branches of state government, and we support our members through providing policy research, technical assistance and analysis, and convening our members together to learn from one another. One important distinction that we do want to make sure that everybody understands is that we are not a think tank. We don't come up with our own ideas and policy preferences and then push them on members. We rely on our members to make requests of us, and then we try to serve them in their professional and public capacity. If you could go on to the next slide. So within the Council of State Governments is what's called the CSG Center of Innovation. And then as a function of the CSG Center of Innovation, in 2004, we launched a policy program aimed at helping states collaborate and develop solutions to multi-state problems called the National Center for Interstate Compacts. And so NCIC, as we call it, is a research-based, member-driven technical assistance center that facilitates the creation, revision, and consideration of interstate compacts to address multi-state problems. And so NCIC has facilitated the development or consulted on the development of all of the active occupational licensing compacts. So next slide, please. Before we get into this, is probably we'll do this slide and then we'll do a couple more and then we'll get to questions. But what is an interstate compact? This is a really important point, and it's not a common tool, and so there's still a lot of confusion about what it is and how it works. So interstate compact, it's important to know 3 main things. It's a constitutionally authorized, legislatively enacted. That's probably the most important one. Legislatively enacted, legally binding contract between 2 or more states. And so recently, compacts have been used to administer regulations that govern multiple states, and that includes licensure. And we talked about this last time, but the best example for a licensure compact is that photo there on the slide, your driver's license. So the state where you live, you get your driver's license or some sort of state ID issued to you, but it authorizes you to either drive or use your photo ID in every other state. And that's because there is a driver's license compact. There's no federal law. So states, knowing that licensure and driver's licensure was left to them in the Constitution, took the initiative to collaboratively work together to solve these problems. So with that, if we could go to the slide about compact development, I believe that's slide 8. Perfect. Thanks so much. So there's a lot of information on this slide, but we really think it's important information. And so I promise we won't go over all of it, but we do want to focus and revisit what's in phase 1 on the left column there. So as Karen mentioned and has been mentioned before, so CSG's worked with ASWB, NASW, CSWA, CSWE. If there's a stakeholder group in the profession, we have at least tried to work with them to create this occupational licensure compact. And the purpose of that is that we hear a lot from state elected officials that they get comments a lot, well, I don't like this provision of this bill, or this is a policy that I don't necessarily love, or I'd prefer a different policy. And state officials can still tell us that they're still able to vote for a policy that might not be considered perfect, or there might be, or their constituents might have different preferences, but what they hardly ever agree to vote for is a piece of legislation that they are hearing was drafted under a closed process in a back room by a small group of people without input from the real people that the legislation would impact. But that presents a challenge for compacts because as much as we'd like to, we can't have every single social work licensee, every single social work regulator or license board member. We can't have every social work executive director in the same room contributing to the conversation all at once. So what we do, or what we attempt to do, is to draw everybody in a few different stages. So first, we create what we call the Technical Assistance Group. And that group first met almost exactly a year ago. And so it's an initial stakeholder group of about 20 to 25 people. And that group, if we're using a model of building a house, this group is responsible for laying the foundation and sort of framing up the structure. And so they don't do things like, talk about like what kind of flooring is going to be in the house or what kind of lighting. And they really are responsible for developing what we call a model. And the social work licensure compacts use a multi-state license model, and then sort of framing up the compact by creating the provisions and the policies that they believe are essential and helpful to create license mobility for the profession. And so they take a look at all of the licensure requirements in every state that licenses the profession, and they create a set of recommendations, and they put that in a document. And that document is then delivered to the compact document team. And Dr. Goodenough, Karen, was on that team with us, and she met with us in DC to take the list of recommendations from the technical assistance group, put pen to paper, and create the compact language draft that we've had available on the project website, that you've hopefully had time to review, and then we hopefully you've had an opportunity to provide feedback via the stakeholder feedback survey. And so this is part of that last highlighted bullet under compact document team. So once we have a draft, we circulate that to states, to state boards, to stakeholders in the profession, to professional organizations and membership groups. And we want them to take time to review the draft. We host these weekly stakeholder review sessions and sessions like this one to answer as many questions as we can, provide some context about what the technical assistance group and the document team had in mind when they drafted this language and what it really means, and then to answer any further questions should that information not be enough and things not be clear. And so we're really believe we've got at least a good start, and we're really thrilled with the amount of stakeholder feedback we've received so far. So we understand that social work is a very engaged profession, And so we've received so far over 2,000 survey responses. We are going to continue to receive survey responses. We'll probably leave the survey open and available for feedback for at least another 2 weeks. And that's just a function of we'll need time to organize and analyze and process all of the survey responses before we reconvene that compact document team to revise and edit and make the document sort of at least a little bit better. We may decide that changes are needed that will require us to engage in a whole additional round of stakeholder review, and that's fine. The process is not about having something available as quickly as possible. It's about having the best possible compact for the profession. And so that's really important. And that's why stakeholder review and sessions like this are such an important part of the process. And so hopefully everybody has had some time and chances to review the document. They've maybe attended one of the weekly sessions. They've attended the previous session of this. And so now we'd really like to answer any questions that we can that we haven't had the chance to address previously. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And thank you so much for your interest and participation in this process.
Yeah, Dr. KG, we can't hear you. You might be on mute.
Thanks so much, Keith. Appreciate those comments and laying some ground for all of us on what is happening here related to the compact. Comments and things. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, but you're fading in and out a little bit.
Yeah.
That is very strange. Sarah Butts, do you want to take it?
My internet is not working. Can you all hear me? You all?
Yeah,
oh, wonderful.
Great,
okay.
Sarah.
So I'm glad to take over from here. I think we can move into Q&A. Should we just start at the top here, you all?
I think, Sarah, we were going to spend just a moment and talk about the question that's on the screen regarding student loan debt, and just have you answer that quick, because you've been spending a lot of time on that before we dive into the Interstate Compact.
Absolutely. So NASW has advocated tirelessly for the social work workforce around student loan debt relief. We have advocated for cancellation. We've just heard this wonderful news from President Biden that he has pledged to cancel a portion of student debt as much as $20,000 for borrowers. Social workers will benefit from that. We've also advocated for changes to the public service loan forgiveness program. We've secured a public service loan forgiveness waiver, which we encourage all social workers with federal loans to please apply under the waiver to get your service on the record with the government, because you may now qualify under PSLF. We've also secured long-term changes to the public service loan forgiveness program, and also employer-sponsored student loan debt relief. So we've been very successful in this area. We have policy updates on NASW's website, and I can certainly respond to emails directly if there are questions about our advocacy around student loan debt.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing before we move on from what Sarah talked about, the work and advocacy NASW has been doing around student loan debt. And I just want to assure our members that we've been working on this for a very long time, very hard, very strategically, and we're very proud of the wins we've been able to achieve. We're going to keep working on this because we know how important it is to our members.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and move to this first question from Becky in the chat. Would licensing supervision be available to social workers across state lines in compact states? So does the compact have anything to do with supervision practice for social workers across the country?
So hopefully Nahali can back me up a little bit here, because this, other than maintaining a threshold for a number of supervised hours for clinical category practice, the compact actually doesn't specify any requirements for how that supervision needs to take place. And so for the most part, that is left up to the individual states and state boards themselves to decide what qualifies as reaching that supervision threshold. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. Some state, there's not a lot of uniformity. There's uniformity in the amount of time and it needing to be full-time and postgraduate supervised practice, but there's not always a great deal of uniformity in rules about sort of in-person or telehealth, or what types of practice actually qualify to gain that experience, that supervised experience. And so that's ultimately a question that the technical assistance groups discussed and reviewed, and ultimately concluded that it would be best to leave to the states to determine what they feel comfortable with in terms of allowing and supervision requirements, and how sort of clinical category practitioners advance in the profession towards that clinical category license. And Nahali, if there's anything you wanted to add there, that's go ahead and add that. Ultimately, the basis is that compacts have to be founded on licensure and regulatory uniformity. And when uniformity doesn't exist, that's a real challenge to get states to agree to something that would require a change, a massive change on their end, or would just be something that they've already reviewed and studied recently and then said, yeah, we actually looked into this question and we arrived at the answer that works for our state. And so we're hesitant to change it now. And so that's something we've left up to the states. And Nahali, I know that maybe you have a little bit additional insight there.
No, I would just pile on. My name is Nahali Kalfas. It's nice to be with you all. I am the interim legal counsel assisting on this project for CSG. I'm involved in a number of other compacts as well, but I would just pile on and say, indeed, we have left that to the state sovereignty for each state to determine, because again, that is an area where there isn't uniformity. And there has to be, we have these vehicles, such as interstate compacts, have to be politically viable. And if you don't have some uniformity, it's really hard to make them politically viable, such that you meet that threshold, 7 states enacting the legislation as ultimately determined in terms of what it's going to look in terms of the model legislation. You're not there yet. This is part of the process. But indeed, that is just something that was a little bit daunting. So we often say we never want to throw out the good for the perfect. And that is the case with these compact models. They are another alternative pathway to licensure. They're not the only pathway. They're an alternative pathway to licensure, in my opinion, an important one for portability, but one that, again, we have to keep our eye on the prize of hitting that politically viable threshold number of states at 7, and hopefully way more in all the states. We would love to see that. So I hope that's somewhat helpful.
Additionally,
so Nahal, go ahead, Kate.
Well, I was just going to add that, if that's something that you feel really strongly about, that if you think that would be a big benefit to licensees or to you especially, that's why the survey exists. If please tell us that if you think the compact would really benefit from including a very specific provision that requires states to recognize supervision from across state lines, we'll at least listen to that and have the compact document team discuss that and review that with them when we reconvene. I can't guarantee that they'll agree with your assessment, but we'll definitely show that to them and have that discussion.
And I think it's important for everyone to understand, Keith and Nahali, what you're alluding to is that it's really up to the states still to designate what the base requirements are of licensure in their state, including people's scope of practice, required supervision hours, other sorts of things, and that the compact access is really only about getting into the compact once you're licensed in a home state. So the compact is not going to tell states what they have to do in order to license everyone generally in their state. Okay, so let's take one other question that I think is kind of this uniformity, like down this path. It is, thank you. Our team is so good. Okay, what happens if a person moves from a compact participating state to a non-compact participating state and they have a telehealth practice with multiple out-of-state clients? And I just want to add kind of another aside to that. Deborah in the chat is asking, if we're licensed in a compact state but do not live there, does that then give us the possibility of licensure in another compact state? This person lives in Texas, which is unlikely to participate in the compact. So let's talk about how people get into the compact and what happens when they move in and out of compact states. And just a reminder, folks, what we're talking about right now is the draft compact. So the way the compact is currently written in draft form. So when these folks say, well, what the compact says, don't take that as the end of the conversation. This is currently what it says. And if you don't like their answers, then you need to respond in that survey and tell them what you'd like to see and what needs to be possible. So Keith and Nahali, can you talk about folks working across state lines, how they get into the compact currently? How do we address these problems that people are having with interstate practice and telehealth practice in particular?
Sure. So I'll start. So if a person moves from a compact member state to a non-compact member state, and that person, when they lived in the compact member state, had an interstate compact license, and that's what allowed them to participate in a telehealth practice with out-of-state clients. As currently drafted, the compact would that practitioner would lose access to the compact. The compact currently has a residency requirement, and so it actually specifies a domicile, which is a very specific legal term. Well, it's not a very specific legal term, but it's a very specific legal concept where it's the location where you intend to return if you're anywhere else. And so it's where you pay your taxes, it's where you have your driver's license, it's where you vote, those kinds of things. And so the compact development team, so the technical assistance group, the compact document team, reviewed that. And what they decided was that because multi-state practice will be sort of a new thing for the social work profession, that they felt more comfortable from a public protection standpoint requiring residency in a compact member state, not just having licensure in a compact member state. And so that's certainly not something that's set in stone. I know, Karen, as you mentioned, that this is currently a draft. And, we say it's not set in stone because, these things can be revised. And that's an important point that I probably should have mentioned in our presentation, that once we get to a final piece of model legislation for the compact where we release it to states and it's ready for enactment, I would tell people that at that point, then it is written in stone, because once the states have started to enact these things, you can't revise them. You can create rules through the commission about how the compact is administered, but you can't change the content of the compact in any substantial way after that happens. And Nahali can speak to that a little bit more. But at the moment, the draft requires residency and licensure in a compact member state. So you have to maintain an active, unencumbered license in the compact member state where you live. And so if that's something that you agree with, share that with us in the stakeholder feedback survey. If that's something you really disagree with, share that with us in the stakeholder feedback survey. But make sure either way to let us know what your thoughts are about the residency requirement as currently drafted in the compact. And so, Nahali, I think you probably want to weigh in a little bit on residency requirements because you were part of a team of attorneys that worked on this. And also, Nahali shouldn't have herself short.
I know this is hugely cunning for folks.
Yes. So the more than the majority, certainly all of the current well-known compacts have this residency requirement for the most part. Part of the reason for this is the sale of this in the states is that it is a means to provide competent, greater access to care without compromising public protection. And this is incredibly important because the only reason that we have the ability to even engage in these compacts is due to each state's regulatory board that is there and is established for public protection. So the reason I believe that most of the compacts have had this tie to residency, there's a number of reasons. The first one that comes to mind is the ability should you need disciplinary action, to be able to subpoena and to gain jurisdiction over a professional who has run afoul of some portion of that state's practice law. So that feels very important. It's really hard to have those same enforcement teeth if you're talking about a state that's not a member to the compact, because remember, this is not just a compact, it's a contract among the states that join. So the enforcement mechanism that provides for public protection, which is the component that always gets both legislator and typically regulatory board in each state buy-in, is that public protection aspect. So often this is the way that most compacts will go, because there is that concern about the public protection aspect. And so long as we know where the practitioner is, just like with your current state, we have a way to obtain service on you. We have the convenience of witnesses should there need to be a hearing in a member state. Those sorts of things feel and seem very important. So I think that probably gave some guidance to the TAG group as well as to the drafting group.
I think, Nahale, this is one of these that's so tricky. It makes sense legally from all of the things you've described. And when it comes to practice, it's really tricky. So we have social workers weighing in with us saying, I live in one state and practice solely in another state. And that state might be really close to me. It might be right across the line. It might be a half hour, an hour away. And maybe I've done that purposefully to keep some good boundaries, healthy boundaries in my practice and that sort of thing. I think, so that's one example where the state maybe that I live in, I've never been licensed in before and wouldn't make sense because I don't practice there. And so could we potentially allow for someone to have their home state license be a state that they practice in? I think the other really tricky life thing that comes out of this is people move. And in this very wild world we live in right now, that I don't think we all know exactly what the future holds for us, but I think it is more transient. I think there's more people moving for work. If my spouse had to move across the country for work, I'd want to be able to keep my practice going. And if I'm doing a telehealth practice, now I move to a non-compact state, and suddenly I have no access to any of my clients, I have to completely, that doesn't even make sense. So how do we make sense of those real life struggles along with sort of the legal constraints that you're talking about?
So, that obviously is the concern and the push with all the other compacts that are moving toward a compact nation. So medicine, nursing that are getting closer to the 50. That's part of the argument for it. Let's make this truly work on a full national portability level by ensuring full membership, so that, again, we have that connectivity. We have that legal enforcement where you're a member and therefore you're bound by the terms of the compact as a member state. So that really is the push. And, like in medicine, there's an ability to claim a state of your primary practice, of your principal practice. The slight difference there is and I don't want to get in the weeds, but that's a slightly different model of a compact. That's an expedited licensure compact versus mutual recognition, which is what this particular compact model is. And it's mutual recognition for good reason. It makes it a lot less expensive for the professionals who want to utilize it. It's a lot more expensive to go with the expedited licensure, and the physicians just had that capability, and that has not been the case with the other professions. It's been too costly. But we can continue to discuss these ideas. We just have to keep our mind on that enforcement piece, so that we know that all the states are abiding by what is required. Sort of the legal argument has been whether or not you can waive due process with regard to a state having jurisdiction over you with regard to your practice. So that's an ongoing conversation. We have not seen a compact yet utilize the non-residency requirement other than expedited licensure with primary place of practice with medicine. So that we haven't seen that yet. Not to say it won't come, but we have not seen that yet.
Yeah, and I would add that there's sort of legal theory considerations about what's possible and what isn't, but there's also practical sort of political considerations that while I understand and appreciate the arguments for not having a residency requirement in a compact and think that those ideas obviously have a lot of merit, but there's also sort of not necessarily a competitive interest, but a collaborative interest, and that's public protection. And ultimately, boards have some say in what goes on here. And then beyond that, policymakers, legislators, elected executives in state governments can also say, I don't really feel comfortable with this. And they may be wrong about that, but ultimately, the political sort of considerations and what states are willing to pass have to be considered in addition to what might be the ideal policy.
Hear that. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Weird things happening in the tech side of the world. Okay, I think there's a really good follow-up question here. I'm not sure if it's Risa or Risa, talking about protecting clients in terms of continuity of care. A driver's license model would be really awesome if we could ensure that people could all practice in every state in some equitable way. But because of the way licensure is written into federal law, it is devolved to the states to decide how to license people. And so the compacts are kind of this side road that we're allowed to take for whichever states want to be in it. So I think those are the legal constraints that Keith and Holly are talking about. And someone else had asked in the chat, are we thinking this is a precursor? Michael has asked, is this a precursor for some type of federal licensing application? And my understanding is there isn't necessarily a federal, this isn't moving in the direction of federal licensing. It is simply a different path, as Nahali, I think you had brought up. This is
Yeah.
Do you all want to say anything along those lines? How does that work? Yeah, go ahead, Nahali.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is not a precursor to federal licensure. In fact, it is largely intended to avoid federal preemption in this area that has always been traditionally left to the states. And it is attractive for that reason, because it still allows for some state sovereignty with regard to how they view the scope of practice of the social worker in their state. So definitely not a precursor, really an alternative to that which has been threatened in the past. We've seen the threat of federal licensure in a number of professions. Years ago, when the anti-regulatory movement was pushing really hard, there was some federal licensure notion, which I think had scared a lot, not just regulatory boards, but scared associations as well, because states are used to having their say and how they protect the citizenry within their borders. And in terms of continuity of care, good question. And again, this is an alternative, an additional pathway. This does not become the only pathway. You can still gain licensure in the traditional method as you have. So if you had clients that you were concerned about continuity of care, and so you decided to get another license in another state through the traditional method, you can still do that. This doesn't supplant that. This provides another alternative. So if continuity of care is possible through other means, then it continues to be possible through other means. This just provides an alternative pathway again. And I'd really try to hit on that, because it's important that folks do understand that there are all sorts of mobility models. There are many states passing universal licensure recognition laws, and that's an alternative pathway for mobility. Expedited endorsement in some states, you have that. So this is but one of many. So in terms of the public protection aspect, it provides another alternative pathway, if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the question from Steve next about how will the compact address client health insurance plans? Will insurance companies reimburse a provider that's in a different state than the client lives in? And I want to actually give this one to Sarah Butts. Sarah's been working a lot on everything related to with licensure and reimbursement for social workers. How do you see these things fitting together in the future of our social work practice?
So you're absolutely correct, Karen, to say that this is asking us to kind of predict the future. This compact is not yet finalized. And we know that as there is greater interstate practice and use of digital technology to include telehealth and other means, that the insurance, the commercial market, as well as government insurance plans are likely to respond to those innovations or developments over the years. Right now, individuals are insured in the state in which they work and live, and their coverage and the services that they have access to are usually dictated by those insurance plans. That said, there has been concern about the impact of interstate practice, and particularly with the scaling of telehealth during the public health emergency period. We've actually been practicing telehealth prior to developing this compact, which is probably leading to some of these types of questions. So we cannot assure you otherwise just to say that what current practice is and that we expect insurance to respond for there to be additional changes. I don't know if my colleagues at CSG have more insight on this based on other compacts.
I think Nahali can probably speak to this a little bit better than I can. I'm not as well-versed in sort of the compact commission and compact administration issues as Nahali is. She's one of the foremost experts on that. And so she'll be able to.
So I will say that the compact itself, in the language of the compact, cannot address this issue. And the reason it cannot is because compacts are merely a tool to say that the states agree to a uniform set of criteria to allow the professional the privilege, or we don't, we're not using that language, but the ability, just like your driver's license privilege to drive in another state, the ability to come into their state and practice without doing primary source verification like we always have through traditional licensing. This is essentially, you look in the compact data system, you see that that person has a license in good standing in their member home state, and they get to come on in and start practicing. However, they are still subject to that state's laws. So that is sort of the beginning and the end. Implementation, administration of that uniform set of criteria that lets you in, that gives you access. Just like your driver's license, where you don't have to stop at each state's DMV, you can get on the road in the next state, you just have to abide by their rules. So the compact will not speak to, and no compacts do, speak to this insurance information. Now, having said that, these issues do come up. And what the compacts always do is message that a compact license, a multi-state authorization to practice, privilege, whatever it's called, is equivalent to a license. So that has in the past really helped with making sure that insurance payments were being made, that payment was forthcoming, because it is tantamount and equivalent to a license. But the compact itself can't speak to coverage areas because it doesn't cover that. It only covers a uniform set of criteria to get you into the state. So I'm sorry we can't answer that for you, but go ahead, Sarah.
I just want to emphasize, this is like second nature to us at NASW, but we have advocated for telehealth flexibilities during the public health emergency. We're supportive of the continuation of behavioral health service access through telehealth, and we expect this compact to enable greater access to telehealth services and provision of telehealth. I just want to emphasize that.
And there will be future changes that we can't see yet. We all had a crystal ball. We'd know exactly how to write this thing for the future also. But my understanding is, Keith and Nolly, that we can only write a comment based on, or a compact based on, the current realities of licensure and regulation in our states. So we can't write a whole blue sky, maybe practice will do this, maybe practice will do that. And that's somewhat tricky for some of us that are seeing the future there quickly also. Let's talk about Lori's question. Is there a question for important states? Comp can't really make states do anything in particular. But I think is important, Lori, is the potential compact could result in universal requirements for things like testing, supervision needed, those sorts of things. So social aren't required to complete all things if they move. One note is, Laura, as we require state, so you're at renewal, you have to do whatever continuing ed is required in your home state, and then you're done. It's not like being licensed in 3 states individually where you have to meet each of their individual requirements. So in some ways, it helps streamline those requirements for the practitioner. Let's go ahead and see if Nahali and Keith have other thoughts related to this, like what does this mean for universal requirements across all of our states?
I guess my initial response to that question is we probably need a little bit to define, like, what do you mean by universal? So because there's, when states pass enact a compact, that almost every one of these licensure compacts, and maybe every licensure compact, it contains a provision that says when an existing state law that's not a constitutional provision, so it's not part of the state constitution, if it conflicts with the compact provision supersedes the conflict. So when a state enacts the compact, they are agreeing to accept these requirements for licensure. And in fact, when there's an entire section of the compact called the state participation section, I think it's Article 3 in the compact, that lays out what the compact requires of states to be able to enact the compact in the first place. And so states can either already have those requirements in place and then therefore enact the compact, or by virtue of passing the compact, they can basically establish these requirements in their state. And so when it comes to things like educational degree attainment, licensure exams, supervision hours, compacts basically create that, or rely on where there's uniformity to create these sort of requirements within the compact so that they're the same between all of the compact member states. So, and compacts also have this sort of secondary effect on regulations and professions, so that even when states are not necessarily members of the compact, they can look at the compact and say, oh, wow, our requirements are really out of line with what other states are doing here. Is that what should we revisit what it is we're doing? And in that case, compacts are a really useful tool for driving uniformity in the states, and that compact member states are agreeing to those sort of to that sort of set of consistent requirements that you mentioned, but they also sort of additionally later on in the process encourage other states to either enact the same set of requirements so that they can join the compact, or they sort of beg the question of states, does what we're doing, is it better or is it more useful to our state than those requirements we currently maintain? And so it's not so much universal requirements, because each state gets to decide what its requirements are, but it does create, at least in the compact member states, a uniform set of requirements, and then encourages states that haven't joined the compact to revisit and look at what their licensure requirements are as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a lot. I know it's a lot for all of our brains to handle.
There's a lot, yeah.
And we would like the compact to fix all things related to the fact that licensure is so different in every one of our states, and that is a headache for all of us. It's not going to fix all of it, but hopefully we'll make accessibility more realistic for folks. And the hope is that we get a compact that our legislators will be willing to pass in as many states as possible, so that it actually is a viable option for practicing social workers. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about how many states or areas have expressed an interest in the compact. So remember, everyone, we first have to get this passed by our state legislatures once it's finalized. This has not been floated to legislators, so we don't know if they like our particular compact, but I know Nahali and Keith have a lot of experience with other compacts. So what can you tell us about how's this going to go once it's ready?
Sure. So once we get to like a final piece of model legislation where it's, consider it written in stone, because these things are really hard to revise. We don't want to do that. We got to make sure this is as good as we can make it before we send it to states. There's a couple of concepts that are probably important to think about here. So first, there's sort of states that consider themselves early adopters or sort of compact positive states. So Utah is a state that I think has joined every single occupational licensing compact. Maryland and Georgia are usually on the front lines of compact adoptions. Let me see here. There's a whole host of states that have either joined all of the active occupational licensure compacts or all but one. And in some cases, that's just because they ran out of time in their last legislative session. So I think maybe Delaware is a member of all 9. Colorado, I believe, has passed 8. And so there's all these states that have passed almost all of the occupational licensure compacts, and they'll probably at least be interested and at least consider the social work compact. You can go onto each compact's website and see which states are members. And CSG has some information available on that through our website. But that being said, it's a little bit premature to talk about states that have actively considered or have expressed interest in the compact so far, primarily because it's still in draft status. So we wouldn't necessarily go to a legislator and say like, oh, you should pass this compact. And they say, oh, well, what's in it? Well, it's not finished yet. And so they probably wouldn't respond too well to that. But when it is ready, there are some states that we think will probably be interested by virtue of participation in the in sort of the compact development process. And so if you go to the project website, I believe that has been shared in the chat, hopefully, but about midway down, there's a list of contributing organizations and stakeholders. And so we list all of the states and all of the organizations that have sent a representative or a staff member to provide advice and expert opinion on the compact. And there's a whole host of states. So there's Arizona, Idaho, Iowa, Maryland. NASW state chapters that were involved include Alabama, Connecticut, Minnesota, Oklahoma. We had a member of New York's General Assembly who herself is a licensed social worker and social work educator. I think North Carolina and South Carolina were both involved. Oregon. Let me think. I know somebody mentioned Texas earlier. The executive director of Texas's social work licensure board was involved. And I would think that they'll at least consider the compact in Texas. It's another pretty big population state. So I wouldn't say that I wouldn't necessarily sign my name to a list of any particular states that I would think are guaranteed to enact the compact. But there's a lot of positive momentum, and I would think that it wouldn't necessarily take too many legislative sessions for the social work compact to reach that 7-state enactment threshold to then establish the commission and start issuing interstate compact licenses.
So that's a lot to say. We have no idea, but we are hopeful that it will pass quickly in 7 states. I do want to go back to your point earlier, though, that if there's significant changes made to the draft from what was announced in all of this public comment, if there are significant changes needed, it may need to go back out for public comment, which may put us back a little in our timeline. So as much as we as social workers out in the field want to see a compact 2 years ago, it's likely that we have to wait until the compact is well written and ready to go. Because I think something that came up in the chat was related to it. Can it be changed at all once it goes out? Grace asked in the chat, I've heard that the compact will be an all or nothing vote for states? Can states agree to be a part of the compact, but then add another license level that expands who's licensed in that home state, those sorts of things? So I think the main point is, and I see Nahali going, no. So the compact, once written, has to be passed exactly as written. And my understanding is the only thing that can change is this preamble language at the beginning, which some states just choose to leave off because they think it's not necessary in their legislation. But other than that, it has to be exactly the same as written so that it is this contract, as Nahali, you've talked about, across states. Is that right?
You
Okay.
have it, Dr. KG. It's about mutuality of obligation. So everyone has to agree to the same set of terms. One state cannot unilaterally impose their will. So the states are retaining their sovereignty with regard to the scope of practice of social workers, but what they're giving up is the opportunity to unilaterally change the terms of the agreement. They can't. It doesn't work.
So
there's no way to enforce it without
so the
that
compact will
similarity.
stay. Right. But individual states could continue to have their own regulations that are different from the compact, that are not related to the compact, and they can also continue to change things in their own regulation as long as it doesn't affect any of the requirements for the compact.
Yes, they can, so long as it doesn't conflict with any of the terms of the compact. And the Compact Commission, once established, would go about setting their own rules too. The difference in the rules for the Compact Commission and the state rules are, compact rules only have to do with the implementation and administration of the language in the compact, nothing more, nothing outside of those lanes. It's very strict. It's just like with state law. Any regulations that you pass must be directly authorized by your State Practice Act. So no difference. So yes, states can do whatever they want to do that's not in conflict with the terms of the compact.
Yeah, it's important
and
to note that
states. Oh, go ahead, Keith.
Well, I was just going to say in response to Grace's comment, there's nothing preventing states from continuing to issue whatever single state licenses they want in their state. So they can continue to offer alternate pathways at whatever category of license they want. It's just that the compact specifies which licenses and what the requirements are for interstate practice. And so that's sort of an important consideration. States can continue to have all they want for single state and for regulating the profession within their borders, but there's specific rules and requirements for interstate compact licenses.
It's true with any else in state law, possible that a legislature could pass the compact and years later just we don't want to be a part of any and get rid of their state legislation. So in the same, so it's not like states they've passed it are in it till the end of time. And maybe I'm just stating the obvious here, but we need to be realistic about, states' rights exist. Go ahead,
states can vote with their feet. If they decided they didn't like being a participant in the compact, they could absolutely, in accordance with withdrawal in the compact, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to leave the professional out there hanging out to dry, proverbial hanging out to dry. If their state decides to withdraw, there's a period of time that they have to give notice to their professionals, that they have to conclude any pending investigations or anything of that nature. It's not just, we're going to walk away right now. We don't want to put professionals in that situation. So there's a means by which a state withdraws. Having said that, I only know of one state to have withdrawn from one compact among all the compacts. So,
yeah. So we'll see how the world turns over time here, and we'll all have to be patient. I think for social workers, folks, and we can kind of feel this in people's questions in the chat too, like, let's get this going. How do we get this going? And I know there's lots of reasons why states may choose not to potentially pass the compact. And I promise you all that once we get through the drafting and the finalization of the actual compact, then we're going to start talking about how are we passing it? Where are we passing it? What's our strategy in getting this thing done? So thank you for that question, Grace. I really appreciate it. So we've just covered Grace's question, and now we're going to turn to our question from Sierra in the chat related to lack of accountability from ASWB regarding the disparities in test results among Black, Brown, and Indigenous social workers. And how can we move towards a compact when this is a really serious issue related to our exams? So I'm going to ask a follow-up question that we've been considering and been hearing a lot from social workers, given the release of this data. Can the testing requirement be removed from the compact legislation? And what, I know that's a huge question and a huge hurdle, Keith and Nahali, what do you think about this?
So there's there's a direct answer to can the compact be removed? It can be. We can remove the exam requirements from the compact if that's what the social work profession decides is definitely its future. Then that can be the compact can be structured, especially for bachelor's and master's category practice, to basically remove the exam requirement if that's what is decided. But that being said, there's also the political consideration, and so we can draft a compact that does not have an exam requirement, but if states look at the compact and say, well, we require exams still, we know that there were these issues with the ASWB exam, but we still require an exam, or we might consider alternative options. So it's a question of, can you? Sure. Will you ever get it enacted in states? That's the question that social work has to figure out. And CSG is happy to partner with social work in achieving its licensure goals, but we can't make decisions about the future of social work licensure and requirements because we're fundamentally not a stakeholder in the social work profession. Mm-hmm. And so these are ultimately questions that are up to you. And so that's kind of, I know that kind of talks around the issue, and I know that might not be satisfying to hear that. But ultimately, these are questions that just we can't answer. If you feel strongly about it, we encourage you to submit stakeholder feedback via the survey. But ultimately, that's kind of where our position as sort of partners in this project stands.
Thanks, Keith. Go ahead, Sarah.
I'll just add that it sounds that states may have latitude to decide about pathways to licensure in their states, and including alternative paths. There have been alternative paths. There have been temporary licensure mechanisms. And so this is an area where the compact may not have complete control, but it is a structure and mechanism to allow for interstate practice by compact participating states. This matter with the exam, I'll just assure you, as Dr. McClain and Dr. Joyner said in the beginning of this session, NASW is working across the association with our partners, including ASWB, to discuss this very serious data matter. And we are taking it seriously. We are all shocked by this information and are committed, as Mitt said, to diversity in our profession. We know that is our strength, and it is an imperative that we have all social workers right now, especially during a mental health crisis through this COVID-19 public health emergency that we've all been working on the front lines around. So I don't know if our leadership wants to say anything else, but I just assure you that NASW is very much committed in working on this matter.
I would like to just add also that, and thank you for that. And I think obviously this is incredibly important. There's no question that's incredibly important. There is language in the compact in its current iteration that speaks to other competency measures. That is in addition to the exam that is currently in that language now. And, as Keith said, you want to get as much state buy-in as possible to hit your number and not just your number, because 7 states isn't going to make a huge difference for professionals. It's just not. You need more than that. And often, you know, we sort of joke, the attorney team and the policy team, that, you know that we've hit the right middle ground when everyone's a little unhappy with the draft. Like someone's taking less, someone's doing a little bit more. You know, sometimes you have to find that middle ground. Now, you know, can you work something out so that there's a spell out of another competency measure? Maybe. Would it be accepted by a large enough mass of the states to make your compact viable? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And frankly, you know, it's not for us to know. It's for the survey to met out. It's for the states to come and speak to us, because I can tell you right now, if a state board is not on board, it is very rare that a legislator will pass a compact without a state board interested in having it. That's the first group they go to. They don't care. They care the most about what the state regulatory board is going to say. Time and time again, we do a lot of legislative testimony. I can tell you that comes up, and I can only think of, you know, 2 or 3 times that something passed above state regulatory board objection. It's very unusual. So that is going to be critical to determining what your uniform set of requirement with regard to a competency measure is.
And I want to reiterate that we understand, we were aware that this issue was going to come up when we were developing the compact, and that's part of the reason we defined qualifying national exam the way we did. There's been a lot of confusion that people think like, oh, there's going to be, I have to take another exam. No, it's, you know, when we drafted it, we understood that the prevailing exam is the ASWB exam, but we also understood and were told that this issue would be coming up. And so we tried to create a carve out for the possibility, and we do this with all professions. There's a reason the ASWB is not specifically named in the compact. There's also a reason that CSWE isn't specifically named in the compact. And that's because these compacts really need to be flexible enough that they can outlast the institutions that currently exist. Not that we hope any of these particular institutions go away, or sometimes they merge, but that because these laws need to be able to be flexible, they need to be specific enough that everybody understands what's going on, but flexible enough to respond to changes in and preferences in governing in the future of the profession. And so we hope we've done a good enough job of creating that definition of qualifying national exam that social work can still sort of determine its future in regards to licensure exams. But I understand that that's not necessarily a satisfying answer in the midst of, you know, some really disappointing news. So.
Yeah,
And Angelo, do you have some thoughts? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's, you know, when the data was released, it was, you know, very concerning, and people were angered by it. People felt harmed by it. There was a lot of reactions, and no downplaying of the reactions. You know, those were legitimate concerns. Some of us weren't surprised in the findings, although it's one thing to know it, and it's another thing to see the hard data that documents it. I can tell you that NASW, and in particularly leadership of NASW, has been, you know, tracking this issue very closely. I've spent a number of hours in the last month or so, have had several meetings with all the chapter executive directors, just hearing their feedback and input. And, you know, basically they're saying, here's what our members in our state, here's what our members in our chapters are talking about, here's what they're concerned about. I've spent time with the NASW licensing task force, you know, hearing their perspectives. And I've also had, I was going to say numerous, it's been multiple discussions with officials at ASWB. You know, and my mantra has been, we need to acknowledge, you know, how devastating this is, how harmful this is, not only to the people of color who are social workers, but also those communities, because those communities have not had the kind of access to professionals, and we have to acknowledge that the disparity is greatest for Blacks. So first for me is acknowledgement. Let's don't try to downplay this. This is devastating. It's hurtful. It's harmful. The second part for me is vision. We need a vision that we have a competency confirmation process that is fair, equitable, and inclusive. And we know the current test results, looking at the current test and the results of that, is not inclusive. And many would argue it's not fair. And some would argue that the test is doing what it was designed to do, to be a gate that doesn't let the numbers of people of color into the profession, or to be able to advance within the profession. And then the third piece of my mantra has been action. We need, acknowledgement is good. A vision for making it better, the test better, or the confirmation process is good. But ultimately, we need action. And we need action in three buckets. Some immediate steps need to happen, some short-term steps, and then intermediate. And immediate is, we might define that as 6 weeks to 3 months, whatever it is, but there needs to be some tangible things so we can see as a profession that we're headed in the right direction. And then we need to go from there. And obviously I think there's sort of a debate within the profession of, do we improve the current test, or do we look for innovations, innovative alternatives to the test? And we know whatever we decide as a profession, we want to do that with a sense of urgency.
And I will just add that this is an urgent time. The compact is so critical for social workers, so I'd like to kind of separate that out from the actual test and bring leaders together and really look at the test of what is happening, of blaming the victim. We can't do that. We've got to look at the test and then really kind of substantiate where they got that information from, and look at institutional racism, things that just build upon using the same question from the same theorists, from the same researchers, may bring a different answer if you look at it from diverse theorists and researchers. And I think that all of us are ready to roll up our sleeves and get that analysis. I understand, no one wants to release, and we can't release the questions, but we sure can release the actual authors, the theorists that make up that test, of where that information comes from. And I think that's the first base thing that we need to do, because everyone right now is just speculating, but we got the data back that people aren't passing that test. So we really have to look at the test and not so much at the people. After we substantiate and get a fair and equitable test, we go and look at how do we help people, right? But I don't want to see the profession spend a lot of time of trying to fake it until we make it, right? We can't fake it anymore. The information is there, and we've got to deal with it.
And I think part of what we're up against right now is the fact that this is a very timely conversation with the compact under development. But as Keith and Nahali are talking about, there is no real precedent in passing compacts without exams, or with compacts in exam conversations like what we're living through right now. This has not happened before in other fields while the compact's being developed. And so I think we just have to all be at the table for this next set of conversations, which it's not fast and easy, as Mitt's alluding to. This is a big deal that we're all diving into and trying to figure out what we as a profession are doing about the exams, and whether we keep the exams and try to fix them, or we rid of them, or what we do. Though all of that remains to be seen. And while we're doing that, we're working on this compact. So let's move to our next question around healthcare. Before we do that, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. KG, I was wondering if Nahali and Keith could speak a little bit to the language that's already in the draft compact in terms of alternative, and I think it says sort of a national qualifying exam or alternative method for competence confirmation. Could you speak a little bit to what that language is, and are there opportunities to really strengthen that language where it's where it's clear that when we say other alternatives, it means we're actually anticipating and looking to other alternatives. It's not just sort of junk language that's thrown in there.
Sure. So I can speak to that. And this is part of what the document team discussed when we met last year in DC, and Dr. Goodenough was part of that team. And so the current definition, and I'll go ahead and read it here, for qualifying national exam means a national licensing examination developed and administered by a national association of social work licensing authorities or other competency assessment approved by the commission. So the compact does require some sort of competency assessment beyond achieving or earning a social work degree, and for the clinical category license beyond completing a period of supervised practice. But it does not specify the ASWB exam has to be that exam. I think the way the definition reads currently is the first part of that. The ASWB exam is currently the only national exam developed by and administered by a National Association of Social Work Licensing Authorities, but we did add or other competency assessment approved by the commission. And so if a number of states develop an alternative assessment that the social work profession believes accurately measures or reflects competency in the various disciplines of social work, then the commission could review that and decide this assessment meets that exam or competency requirement, allows states to use that as meeting the qualifying exam, and then those people could gain access to our practitioners could gain access to the compact without having to take the ASWB exam by virtue of completing this, whatever new or revised or other assessment might be created. So, and that's not just a function of ASWB's exam release data. That's also an effort by compacts to just sort of be evergreen and to continue operating should changes in the profession occur. They have to be somewhat flexible. And so we want to make sure that, one, the compact works for the profession, but it also reflects the future of the profession as well. And so these are important considerations. Hopefully that answered your question or clarified. If there's anything else I can provide, that let me know.
I think it does, Keith. I think in the time that we have left, we have a couple other things that are coming up that we want to make sure we hit. I think we could definitely spend all day talking about this one, and there's a lot of unknowns at this moment. I do think that leaving those decisions up to the commission is a bit concerning to some. And so we're going to turn to some questions regarding the commission and who's on the commission, like who makes up the commission, how public is the process about the rules, how can we ensure that social work voices are heard in the commission decision making, that sort of thing. So it looks, the questions now popped up here. It looks like in the draft, no representatives of practice or social work associations have a voting role on the commission, and that's especially concerning. How can we change that? What are your thoughts about that, Keith and Holly?
So I'm not sure that is the concern that like the prevailing professional membership organizations like NASW, CSWA wouldn't have voting interest. Correct. In them. Okay. So I believe that the compact does provide for ex officio members.
So there are two positions, but they're non-voting the way the draft is written.
Correct. And I may just speak to that since we're running so short on time. I will say that the delegates that are appointed, there's a potential for either an administrator or ED of a regulatory board or the regulated social work member of that board or agency to participate as a voting delegate on the commission. So while those association positions are non-voting, although I will say that in my experience with the ex officio participation in other compacts, they're very involved. It's not like they're precluded from discussion or from having a seat at the table. It's true they don't vote, but you do have the opportunity to seat a delegate who is a regulated social worker who sits on a regulatory board. So I do feel that there is some representation of the professional there, that I think it's important that we note that, because that there is representation should a state decide to seat their regulated social worker on the commission.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So it is true, though, that the ex officio members do have a term, and that others, as currently drafted, do not have a term. And I think that, this was something that came up in the chat, but it's relevant here. We have a circumstance in the profession of social work currently where states are passing laws that violate the standard of care and the NASW Code of Ethics, particularly around access to gender affirming care, for trans youth, as an example, and for the full array of reproductive services for individuals seeking reproductive health care, to include abortion services, which social workers often provide counseling around. So there is concern that individuals that are sitting on this compact commission do not have sufficient understanding of social work practice, our ethics, and standards of care.
If I may, because this may be useful. Actually, I've also worked with licensed professional counselors counseling compact. We actually are in drafting. We're done with drafting. We're reviewing a potential statement to address particularly the Dobbs case fallout. And how I can address this the most directly, I believe, without getting into the weeds, is to say that a compact, as we've discussed, abides by each state's scope. So what the compact does is gain you entry into the state, but it does not change each state's scope at all. It's still up to the state. Now, having said that, the bit of assurance you can have is, by that same token, that we can't tell another state how to engage in their scope of practice dictates. It also says that another state can't try to impose discipline on a professional who was acting legally and lawfully in another member state. You can't try to impose your state's notion of scope when you have a compact member who's engaging in lawful practice in another state. So it's a two-way street. What you are required to abide by in each state, you're required to abide by. And you're quite right. There are no compacts that really get into specific ethic codes that is left to the states. But again, you can't have one state saying, well, you went into a state where this particular, let's say, abortion counseling is lawful. I'm going to hold you responsible as though you were in my state and kick you out of the compact. We can, as a compact, say that's not what you agreed to. You agreed to that the place where the treatment is being received is the state that is relevant. So what we do is we follow the law in that state.
Thank you so much, Nahali. I'll just say that, and I'm sure you understand this, that in states where there is our scope is being impacted because of conflicting laws and social workers are subject to adverse actions, there is grave concern about that, even devoid of an interstate compact. And then are there implications through the compact commission and fees that could be levied in other states? So it's a concern that we've heard from members, and I wanted to bring it here for discussion.
I appreciate that. And I do want you to feel confident that the compact commission cannot speak to what's happening in one particular state. It can only speak to implementation of the compact itself.
Thanks for that. Again, very deep discussion it really goes to the heart of what's happening for individual social workers across the country. And so that's what we're trying to balance, and also coming up with the compact that works, that we can pass in legislatures. I want us to talk just for a minute here about the timeline, and I'm going to just share some high points, let the CSG team share if there's anything I've missed, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McClain for some closing remarks. So in terms of our next steps, we have probably a couple weeks. What we're hearing from CSG is we have a couple more weeks where the public comment process will be open. So folks can go ahead and review the draft legislation and put your comments into their SurveyMonkey tool and share your thoughts on what you need to see changed in this for the scope of your practice in your state. From there, we will then go back to this table that's been working on the drafting process, and look at these several thousand comments that have come in from across the country and make some decisions about what needs to be changed in the compact. Again, it's possible that if there are significant changes, it will go back out for public comment. And I saw someone in the chat say, well, maybe because of this ASWB data and all of this that we're now wrestling with differently, we should put a halt on this and wait another year or something like that. That's part of what I'd love to hear from the CSG team about kind of what's your timeline in terms of, I know you have a grant from the DoD to get this thing done. I know I've heard you say many times it needs to be done right. It needs to work both for the profession and for passing in legislatures. What are your thoughts about, is there a final timeline on this thing, or do we keep at it until we know we're at the place? Keith, what do you think?
So without any sort of other particular commitments, the only commitment that CSG has in this process is developing a compact for social work licensure that works for the profession. And so if it doesn't work for the profession, then we're not going to take it to the states. We're not going to take it to states at any legislative session. And so it's been sort of an unofficial goal that we would have the compact ready for the 2023 legislative sessions. And so we'd have this wrapped up by the end of the calendar year. That isn't necessary. That isn't that isn't written in stone anywhere. That's not written down, as far as I know, anywhere. We would love to have it ready for the 2023 legislative sessions if that's possible. So that way we could get a jump on state enactments and hopefully get things moving a little bit sooner towards having this compact available to social workers. But that being said, there's no point to having a social work compact ready for the 2023 legislative sessions if it doesn't work for the social work profession. And so if we have to wait on things until 2024, that's what we'll do. If we have to wait on things longer than that, that's what we'll do. Ultimately, we have to create a compact that licensees support, that regulators support, and that ultimately policymakers will be willing to vote for. And that's also an important consideration. But if it needs to wait till 2024, that's what needs to happen. If it needs to go to a second round of stakeholder review to make sure that we've got everything in the compact that we need and remove the things we don't, that's what's got to happen. So until the social work compact works for the profession, we'll keep working at it.
Absolutely. And I think we at NASW have that same commitment in the chapters, because it will be a heavy lift for every one of our chapters to work with our licensing boards and try to get this compact passed in each of our respective states. And we're already moving down that path of thinking about what's it going to take in my particular state to get this thing passed. So folks, we're right there with you. Let's hang on to our seats here through the drafting process and see where it takes us. With that, I want to turn it over to Angelo McClain to share any closing comments for tonight.
Thank you, Dr. KG. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mitt, for joining us, particularly Mitt, because your being here helps really just demonstrate to our membership that at the highest levels, their support for getting the compact and getting it right. Keith and Nahali, my closing remarks go back to the mission of the Council of State Governments. In one of your slides, you talked about the mission is, and I got 3 parts of your mission that resonated with me and that would resonate with social workers. You champion excellence in state governance, you create innovations, and you work to solve multi-state problems. You're hearing from our members and from participants on this call and folks we've talked to in other calls that we want to continue working with you to champion excellence in the social work interstate compact, to create innovations that foster better social work practice. And we want to continue working with you to create solutions that provide answers to multi-state problems, because we know the better the solutions, the more states they're going to sign on. And so that's our mantra in working with you guys. And we appreciate the Council of State Governments working with us. And my last thought to our membership, our team is excited, energetic, and enthused about what we can do in this pivotal moment to create a interstate compact for social work, one that works and one that we can all stand behind. And with that, I'll say good night, and we'll see you down the line.
Take care, everyone.